Happy Monday, everybody. Thanks for watching the Fight for Liberty show. I hope you had a good day today. I know it might have been your first Monday in like 5 or 10 or 20 weeks, but I hope you enjoyed your time back at work, and I hope that you enjoyed the show that we have for you tonight. We're going to start out by asking the question, what's up, Washington?
Shut up and sit down.
Welcome to What's Up, Washington. Today's politician isn't actually from Washington. He's a mayor in upstate New York. Ben Walsh is the 54th mayor of Syracuse, New York, the first independent mayor of the city, and the first to win without the support of a major party since Louis Will won on the progressive line in 1913. Now, if you're from New York, you probably recognize his last name, as it was synonymous with powerful Republicans for decades, thanks to his father and grandfather. His granddaddy, William F. Walsh, was the 48th mayor of Syracuse and a congressman for 6 years. Ben's father, James, was also a congressman in the area for 20 years. Both were Republicans and were very well liked in the community. Interestingly enough, when Ben was 18 while his dad was a sitting representative, he registered to vote unaffiliated. He maintained this autonomy from party politics, saying once, "I always resented the role of party politics in governance and public service, and I felt it was inherently divisive." Now, I couldn't have agreed more. After graduating college, Walsh got a job in Albany working for the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. Such a long name, I feel so sorry for the receptionist. Now, in '02, he returned to his hometown to run his dad's congressional campaign, helping his father to a 62% victory. Back in the city he loved, he got a job at the Metropolitan Development Association, which was an early iteration of the Center State CEO, an economic growth organization similar to a chamber of commerce. There he started working to better the city of Syracuse and had the idea for what is now the Syracuse Land Bank. Here he was able to work with business owners all over CNY, gaining respect and trust of the people of Syracuse. Shortly thereafter, he got a job offer from Mayor Stephanie Miner, a bleed blue Democrat at the time. There, as the Deputy Commissioner of Neighborhood and Business Development, he made the land bank a reality, led a charge on the renovation of Hotel Syracuse, and worked to restore parks across the city, with a heavy focus on Onondaga Lake Park. During this time, he also served as the president of the Gifford Foundation, another organization dedicated to innovation and growth in central New York. Here comes the really fun part of the story. In 2015, he decided he was going to run for mayor, but was still unaffiliated. He needed to find a way onto the ballot, so he asked the Republican Party, but his lack of dedication by being an independent made many members of the party uneasy. Now, after a fight that ended in the city chair resigning, they nominated Laura Levine, and the Democrats wanted nothing to do with him, accusing him of being a Republican in sheep's clothing, completely disregarding his work for Mayor Miner and the fact that even his campaign manager, Christy Frame, was a registered Democrat. They went on to nominate Juanita Perez Williams. Ben decided to remain independent, no matter how hard the Libertarian Party begged him, and ran his campaign against partisanship. He also appeared on the Reform Party line, but they don't really count. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and Working Families Party all put up candidates as well. Ben had to prove to a majority blue city that he was not a Republican like his entire family, but he also had to watch himself and not go too far left, and then he would lose some of his early supporters and donors. He was able to walk the line quite well thanks to some help from both sides. His good friend Tim Carroll started the group Dems for Ben, along with some friends, and a lot of people Ben worked with on the Hotel Syracuse project came through in a big way with donations. Then, on November 7th, Ben Walsh won, with over 54% of the vote. In a six-way race, Ben didn't just win, he took a majority of the city with him, proving resoundingly that the two-party system is not invisible or infallible. Once elected, Walsh made it clear he would not play by the divisive games of party politics. As his dad once said, Ben has always been an independent-minded person. In 2019, he ruffled every feather on city council by vetoing a budget that gave him and every councilor a raise. I don't know about you, but I would find it very hard to not only say no to a raise, but to do so knowing it would piss off every single one of your coworkers. He said, there is always room for improvement, and in particular, when we're discussing the potential of giving out raises, it seems like an appropriate time to take a look at the process and determine whether or not there are additional ways that we can show our constituents, our taxpayers, who are paying our bills and paying our salaries, that we are providing maximum value to them. This was the kind of fortitude I had been searching for in a politician. Now, Ben jumped back on my radar this week during these endless nationwide protests when he marched with Black Lives Matter on Thursday. What I loved about this is that he didn't just stop by for a photo op or to shake some hands like most politicians have been these last few weeks. He actually marched with them and led a few chants. It is so refreshing to see a politician run a successful administration free of partisan bullshit. The mayor's history with businesses, lobbies, labor unions, and charities gives him a fairly well-rounded outlook on the political landscape of his city. And he has worked hard to remain a mediator, representing his constituents, not his donors or his party. This gives me hope for the rest of the country. And it shows what I have been saying for years. If you want to break the duopoly, start local. We will never win the presidency without a few hundred mayors, DAs, councilmen, and congressmen already in office around the country. If you are thinking of running for office, don't pick the office that will sound the coolest. Pick the race you can win. You can always move up the ladder of politics, but first you have to get on it. Now, Ben obviously isn't perfect. No one is, especially in politics. But he is doing his best to stay above the bullshit. His dedication to independence and anti-partisanship has made him one of my heroes. Now, thanks for watching, and tune in next week to ask, what's up, Washington? Welcome to Deep Dive. Now, before I start, I want to preface this bit in a tribute to the great Jim Jeffries by saying that in many ways, I think lynching is wrong. In no way do I want you to take what I'm about to say that I'm a fan of lynching. It's evil. Okay? That being said, I do want to talk about the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. Now, it was passed in the House of Representatives on February 26th of this year, but it is just coming into the news because Senator Rand Paul proposed an amendment to it. Now, this has gotten him labeled as a racist, as a Klansman even, as a fan of lynching, but he is definitely not that. He is just trying to give some clarity to the act. He said that he is a fan of the act as long as his amendment is in there. The amendment only clarifies a few things. And he even said, you think I'm going to get good publicity out of this? No. I'll be excoriated by simple-minded people on the internet who think somehow I don't like Emmett Till or appreciate the history of Emmett Till. He said, I'll be lectured by everybody. And he's been proven right. He's being torn apart left and right. Now, let's dive into the actual bill. As always, Section 1 names the bill, and Section 2 starts off, Congress finds the following, which is followed by 22 bullet points ranging in topics of things that this bill means that Congress believes. Now, it starts off with the crime of lynching succeeded slavery as the ultimate expression of racism in the United States following Reconstruction. Number 2 is lynching was widely acknowledged practice in the United States until the middle of the 20th century. See all these facts, but just things that everybody kind of knows, but they want to make sure that people understand, right? Lynching was a crime that occurred throughout the United States with documented incidents in all but 4 states. At least 4,742 people, predominantly African Americans, were reportedly lynched in the United States between 1882 and 1968. Now, there, it specifically says that there hasn't really been a lynching since 1968. I would personally disagree, but as we'll find later, the things that I would consider lynching, this bill wouldn't. But we'll get into that in a minute. With bullet point 5, it says 99% of all perpetrators of lynching escaped from punishment by state or local officials. Now, I completely believe that. I'm sure that they've done their homework. I just think it's kind of an interesting statistic, very hard to prove, especially because this was long before there was any kind of a justice system that worked. Not that there is a justice system that works, but 99%, that is kind of scary. That is a problem. Goes on to list a couple of more things here and there, and then gets a good dig at the Senate with bullet point 10 saying between 1920 and 1940, the House of Representatives passed 3 strong anti-lynching measures. Then going on to say the Senate considered but failed to enact anti-lynching legislation, despite being requested by civil rights groups, presidents, and the House of Representatives. So, getting a little dig that the House has already done this 3 times. This is now the 4th time that the House has passed anti-lynching legislation. The Senate has held it up every single time. Why? Variety of reasons. Honestly, normally because a lot of those times they had a Republican majority and a lot of old racists. It has been a little while since they've tried. It goes on to talk about publications and other things that have brought out the history of lynching or recognized the victims. And then it goes into a few kind of, in my opinion, arbitrary kind of feel-goody things, like only by coming to terms with history can the United States effectively champion human rights abroad. Again, true, but does this stuff belong in legislation? Bullet point 14 is, an apology offered in the spirit of true repentance moves the United States towards reconciliation and may become central to new understanding on which improved racial relations can be forged. Now, again, true, but what is the purpose of listing all of this out in a piece of legislation? That's my personal question. It then talks about more statues and monuments that, again, don't really think belongs in legislation. Why is this in here? It takes up 7.5 pages full of these bullet points and then less than a page and a half of actual legislation. And we'll talk about how most of that is hollow and empty as well. Now, bullet point number 20 is where we get into some slightly suggestive or subjective points. Now, I don't disagree with any of the things that are said here, but I personally have some friends that would, although I argue with them repetitively. I think including this kind of divisive bullshit in legislation is ridiculous. It's impractical. It talks about that Donald Trump signed into law Joint Resolution 49, which condemned the racist violence and domestic terrorist attack in Charlottesville in 2017. It then goes on to talk about that resolution and quotes this piece. It says, hundreds of torch-bearing white nationalists, white supremacists, Klansmen, neo-Nazis who chanted racist, anti-Semitic, and anti-immigrant slogans and violently engaged with the counter-demonstrators on and around the grounds of the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Now, again, I agree. That is what happened. But this kind of stuff it's lip service. It's getting in a win. It's purely just a political win that's saying, "Ha, yeah, it's now in law. It's been signed by Donald Trump because if it passes the Senate, he'll have to sign this again, even though he already signed it. They already passed a resolution talking about this BS. It's already gone through this, but they're putting it in again just to get another repeated, like, ha, see, we already agree that this is true. We're just going to shove it in your face again. Again, I agree with it all, but not necessary. It goes on to talk about a few pieces of the U.S. Federal Code and the Civil Rights Act that we'll actually get into in a little bit with when we start the legislative part of this act finally. And with that, Section 3 of the Act says Chapter 13 of Title 18 of the United States Code is amended by adding at the end the following. 250, lynching. This says whoever conspires with another person to violate Section 245, 247, or 249 of this title or Section 901 of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 shall be punished in the same manner as a completed violation of such section, except that if the minimum term of imprisonment for such completed violations is less than 10 years, the person may be imprisoned for not more than 10 years. So what that says is any person who conspires with somebody else to do any of these few things, which we will discuss, don't worry, gets punished in the manner of if they had actually completed the act for up to 10 years. Or no more than 10 years, yeah. So, again, this doesn't have a lot to do with lynching. That's what we come to terms with first here. As we'll discuss, those three pieces of the U.S. Code also doesn't. This just means that if you conspire with somebody else to do something, you get charged as if you did it. Specifically, Section 245 of the U.S. Code, which is federally protected activities. It says, whoever, whether or not acting under the color of law, by force or threat of force, willfully injures, intimidates, or interferes with, or attempts to injure, intimidate, or interfere with any person. Goes on to list all of those persons. Gives it a penalty of 10 years. Okay. So, this, as we're going to see in a bit, is Rand's whole problem. So, not only does the Anti-Lynching Act mean that conspiracy to do any of these things is the same as doing it, now we're talking about intimidates. Literally, that's a word. Whoever intimidates, 10 years. Now we have whoever conspires to intimidate, 10 years. This is kind of messed up, guys. Like, this is so broad. This is anything that if they say it's about race, you're fucked, dude. But then it goes on to say, nothing in this section shall be construed as to deter any law enforcement officer from lawfully carrying out the duties of his office. What is this? So the cops can still do this as long as they say they had to complete their job, which, leaving that in there and specifically addressing the pieces of law that say exactly this, because all three bullet points, or all three pieces of the code that we're looking at have that bit in it. Is this what we should be talking about right now, considering what's going on? Or should we be fixing these pieces of this code. Maybe let's amend that. Let's get rid of that. We'll talk about that in a second too. Now, 247 is damage to religious property. What does that have to do with lynching? Nothing. The only logical explanation I can think of for this is burning a cross. But that's far-fetched, guys, right? I don't really think, especially because it says intentionally defaces, damages, or destroys any religious property because of the religious character of that property or attempts to do so. So yeah, I mean, a cross, it's not religious property, which literally, it was my only logical explanation. So in an anti-lynching bill, we're making conspiracy to attempt to damage religious property federally punishable by 10 years. Do you see why this is kind of falling apart? Again, I'm totally against lynching, but what is this? Then Section 249 is hate crime acts. Now we're getting somewhere, right? But number one, in subsection 1 of this is offenses involving actual or perceived race, color, religion, or national origin. Now, according to the NAACP and legal definition, a lynching has to already fall under these categories. So now we're talking about the part of the law that basically already makes lynching illegal. Whoever, whether or not acting under the color of law, willfully causes bodily injury to any person or through the use of fire, firearm, dangerous weapon, explosive, incendiary device, or attempts to cause bodily injury to any person. Boom. As long as it's race, color, religion, or national origin. But it actually then goes on to repeat everything again with religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. So, again, not all about lynching, but directly bolstering all of these laws. So, attempt to commit, again, we have now, if this bill passes, we have the conspiracy with another person to attempt to commit bodily injury to another person is punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison. Now, back to the actual bill, it then just says where this should be found in the U.S. Code, and then it talks about budgetary effects, saying that it's all in compliance with the statutory Pay-As-You-Go Act of 2010, and that takes up the rest of the legislation. So, as I mentioned earlier, we've got an 8-page bill, 6.5 pages are these bullet points, then this much bolsters huge amounts of legislation, and then the rest is where to find it and some budgetary crap. It's lip service. It's this whole bill. It's called the anti-lynching bill. It's got all of these facts about lynching. It makes us feel good about racial equality, which we all should do. Like, all of this stuff, I wish everyone in the country actually agreed with this or believed this. That would be amazing. Fortunately, they don't. But doing this, passing this through Congress, or even having Trump sign it himself, will not turn the country. This is honestly pretty pointless. All it's doing is giving conspiracy to commit any of these things a 10-year federal sentence. Now, this brings up Rand's amendment, which just clarifies this. And I'm going to show you him kind of introducing the amendment, and then also Kamala Harris's response to it. So check this out.
I seek to amend this legislation not because I take lynching lightly, but because I take it seriously. And this legislation does not. Lynching is a tool of terror that claimed the lives of nearly 5,000 Americans between 1881 and 1968. But this bill would cheapen the meaning of lynching by defining it so broadly as to include a minor bruise or abrasion. Our nation's history of racial terrorism demands more seriousness from us than that.
The idea that we would not be taking the issue of lynching seriously is an insult to Senator Booker, to Senator Tim Scott, and myself, and all of the senators, past and present, who have understood this is part of the great stain of America's history. To suggest that anything short of pulverizing someone so much that the casket would otherwise be closed except for the heroism and courage of Emmett Till's mother, to suggest that lynching would only be a lynching if someone's heart was pulled out and produced and displayed to someone else is ridiculous. And on this day, the day of George Floyd's funeral, on this day, a day that should be a day of national mourning.
Now, Harris's response to this cracks me up because Rand called her out on something and her only response was, that is an insult to me and a bunch of other people, right? Yeah, it is. He was kind of insulting you. He was saying you are taking lynching like a joke by passing this bill, and he's right. That was an insult. Calling an insult is not really a comeback to an insult. But like I said earlier, is this what's important right now? With what we have going on, we have rioting in the streets every day. We have cops murdering unarmed people, and now with the protesting, even peaceful protesters are getting killed, are getting tear gassed, are losing eyes to rubber bullets. Is this what we should be talking about right now? Or should we be ending qualified immunity? Should we be taking apart those pieces of the U.S. code that I just read to you, that this is bolstering? Should we be taking those pieces apart, especially the part that gives complete immunity to cops that are doing their jobs? This is complete and total lip service. Again, lynching should be a federal crime. If that's what this bill was, I would agree with it. But that's not what it is. And that's why I at least like Rand's amendment. And he said he would support the bill if his amendment was there. All his amendment does is clarify, make sure that this has to be like a serious thing for it to qualify for this. Because I don't want to go to jail for conspiracy to attempt to do anything. Especially with the renewing of the Patriot Act and all the government spying. Just think of how many times you say out loud to your friends some terrible shit. You don't really mean it, but if that was on record, that is conspiracy to attempt to commit something. Man, I would love to just beat that guy up. Like, we shouldn't be thinking like that, and I try my best not to, but we're all human, right? We all say that kind of shit, and this bill literally gives government the authority to throw you in jail for up to 10 years for that shit. Now, the House, it passed like ridiculously high numbers. Okay, only 4 people voted against it, including Amash and Massey, and 16 people, 10 Democrats and 6 Republicans, didn't vote. I find it astounding that that many people actually wanted it passed in the House, because there are more people against it in the Senate than just Rand Paul, which is really interesting because part of the act, it mentions that a 90 members of the United States Senate agreed to Senate Resolution 39 in 2005, which apologized to the victims of lynching and the descendants of those victims for the failure of the Senate to enact anti-lynching legislation. So the Senate can't pass legislation, but 90% of them can agree to apologize for their inactivity. That resolution could have been a bill that made lynching illegal, but they didn't do that. They just apologized for inaction. Do you get that? Like they literally signed their names to an apology for sucking. And 90 members of the Senate. There's only 100. That's 90%. We can do better than this, guys. Let's actually pass some anti-lynching legislation. Let's make it federally illegal. I'm totally for that. I want to see that right now. Let's also end qualified immunity, but I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the night. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Deep Dive, and we will be right back with more Fight for Liberty after this. Fight for Liberty was based on a principle of helping people, so here are a few channels and companies that I care about. So do me a favor and go check them out.
Shut up and sit down.
As economies start to open back up, jobs are coming back, and everything looks as though it's about to return to normal, two major problems in America will still exist because they were here long before COVID and have only gotten worse. They are food waste and food insecurity. The last 3 months, the whole country has tried to help the people that were out of work or falling on hard times to make sure that they have food on their tables and in their bellies. Now, this problem did not start with COVID. In fact, most of the statistics I will read to you tonight are from before the virus even hit. In the United States, 50 million people are food insecure. That is 1 in 6. Now, food banks and shelters have never been able to keep up with this problem. And part of that is the stigma that people have for those who go and get help from organizations like this. So honestly, that's step 1. If you need food or clothes or anything to better your life, do not be afraid to ask for it or to go get it from someone other than yourself. Whether that be a nonprofit, a government organization, your church, or just your friends and family, if you need help, please go get it. If you see other people getting help, shut your damn mouth, because it's none of your business. Leave them alone. We need to end the stigma that people can't ask for help. It's crippling America. The other issue is food waste. In America, we throw out 40% of the food that we produce. $165 billion in food waste every year, which works out to an average of 20 pounds per person per month that just goes into the trash. Now, you may be thinking that this is all on the back end and that you have very little to do with this problem, but that's actually not the case at all. In fact, in America, we throw out between 15 and 20% of the groceries that we buy. That'd be like walking out of the grocery store with a cart full of food, unloading it into your car, and just leaving a quarter of it in the cart, pushing it back into the cart corral, and then driving on home. You know, it doesn't feel like that because we get to stare at it and watch it decompose until we throw it away. But are we paying for tickets to the banana molding show? Is that why we're going to the grocery store? I don't think so. Now, one of the main reasons that people throw away so much of their food is because of expiration dates or sell-by dates. Fun fact, expiration dates are not required by law and are made by the manufacturers. It's their best guess of when the food is going to be at its best. This means that it has nothing to do with safety, it has nothing to do with when the food is going to go bad or when it expires, but purely when the manufacturer wants to make you buy more food. That's it. It's kind of like Apple ruining your phones after a new phone comes out, so you have to go buy a new phone. But it's sneakier because you believe it's actually in your best interest and for your safety, and you could get sick if you don't go out and buy a new phone. Now, there is a large portion of this that happens on the back end as well. Don't get me wrong. There are a few different reasons for this. Number one, because of how we shop. Stores are forced to overstock.
If this was what I had, and there was an hour left in the market, that one bunch of chard would sit there and no one would buy it. But if I had 30 bunches of chard, all like bursting out, I'd probably sell like 25 of those bunches of chard. So what does that say? Like, people are totally impulse shopping, and they think if there's one left, that there's something wrong with it.
The other reason is the direct cosmetic requirements given to food. These come from a variety of different sources, from the manufacturers of the food, the stores that sell them, or the people that buy the food. But most annoyingly, they come from the United States Department of Agriculture. Now, it's one thing to say that I don't want to sell bruised peaches in my grocery store. It's another thing entirely to say it would be illegal for me to sell bruised peaches in my grocery store. The USDA has quite strict requirements down to the individual kind of produce. For example, with apples, there are multiple tiers of the kinds of apples of which you can sell, and they affect the market value. These go all the way from US2, which is the lowest sellable, all the way up to extra fancy. Now, between these two factors, we fill landfills with completely edible food.
We got a whole load, pretty much, of loose organic lettuce. You know, we've got spinach towards the back. Looks like it's perfectly fine, nothing wrong with it. We got some kale here. We got broccoli in the back as well. We have plenty of produce to make a salad here.
And this problem is not just from an economic standpoint, but also an environmental one, as explained here.
If you were to throw an apple core just out into the woods, it's not a big deal. The problem comes when all of that waste is aggregated and it decomposes without air in a landfill. That anaerobic condition is what creates the methane, which is a greenhouse gas that's more than 20 times as potent as CO2 at trapping heat.
If food waste was a country, it would rank third globally in greenhouse gas emissions, after China and, of course, the United States. This also causes a waste of tons of natural resources, as half of the land and 80% of the fresh water in America goes to producing food, and 10% of the energy budget is used to transport food. Now, think of the 40% waste. That means 20% of the land is wasted. That means 32% of the fresh water in America wasted. Food is one of the biggest environmental problems in the world. So we have two problems here: food waste, food insecurity. It would seem like a self-explanatory solution to combine the problems. They kind of solve each other, right? I mean, just 1/3 of our food waste would end hunger. But for unknown reasons, barriers have been put up for decades to stop us from being able to actually make this happen. For a while, you needed special permission to even donate food. And there are dozens of bureaucratic hoops you have to jump through before you can be that person that gives the food to the people that need it. This means that sometimes it has to be like a 5 to 6 step process to get the food from the people that don't need it to the people that need it. And in many cases, it is more expensive and more difficult for a restaurant to try to get the extra food into the stomach of the starving people than it would be for them to just throw it in the trash. Which is why we have offered tax breaks for corporations that donate their food. It's great. One main problem with that is it only really applies to large corporations. The tax breaks to smaller corporations have been temporary in the tax code, meaning they have to be renewed every year. So a small business has no idea if they will get a tax break at the end of the year for going through all the work. This makes the incentive fail because they still won't know if it'll be there next year. Now, in 2015, the House of Representatives tried to make these tax breaks permanent for small businesses. But the bill got bogged down with a whole bunch of randomness. Then in the Senate, it was gutted, renamed, and passed as the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. Like, nothing to do with this. So small businesses still can't be sure that saving the planet won't bankrupt them. So how do we fix this? Step 1, only buy what you need. Step 2, shop locally sourced produce as much as possible, and don't be afraid to take the last thing off of the shelf. Now, step 3, if you're a grocery store, restaurant, school, office, or even household that has a ton of leftovers, donate them. Do your best to make sure that no edible food goes in the trash. Now, if you've been following me since the very beginning, you may remember me going live to talk about an organization called Rescuing Leftover Cuisine. This nonprofit has been dedicated to being the middleman that I discussed earlier, to make sure that food goes from the people that have it to the people that need it. These guys are truly fighting the good fight. Founded by Robert Lee in 2013, RLC has served over 3.5 million meals. They are currently active in 11 states and quickly expanding. They go about this mission a little interestingly, kind of trying to be the Uber of charity. As a volunteer, you sign up for an individual rescue that takes between a half an hour and an hour, and depending on the location, it can be a little bit longer. You then go pick up the food, you bring it to the charity, the homeless shelter, and then you go home. It's a perfect way to volunteer, even if you have like a crazy 60-hour work week. Now, for the donors, it's also great because as long as the government keeps renewing it, there are still tax breaks, as well as the money they save by reducing their trash. I mean, this is really big, especially in New York City, as commercial trash pickup is actually kind of expensive. Now, rescuing leftover cuisine is determined to giving a free market solution to food waste and hunger, and I am very, very proud to work with them in this mission. If you want to learn more about food waste and what you can do to help, go to rescuingleftovercuisine.org. I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe!
But wait, I am breathing. I can breathe, and I will breathe. I take a breath for all the living lives that were taken. I take a breath for all the ancestors that jumped off the sides of the boats into the water before they ever made it. I take a breath for all the lynched. I take a breath for all the students at PWIs left to hold their breath in zone. I take a breath for George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, and all the lives that were taken. I take a breath for everyone whose name didn't make it. I take a deep breath before telling all the siblings, listen.
The protests haven't stopped, and they won't anytime soon. That was a clip from Saturday's Black Lives Matter protest in Syracuse, New York. I was there, and so was another group called Last Chance for Change. They have pledged to 40 days of marching in Syracuse. Today's Monday, so this will be day 10. They're going to continue marching, and they've said that they'll reconsider the number at the end if they still haven't gotten what they want. On Saturday, we had a state of emergency in the city of Syracuse. It was a bit rough. There were cops everywhere while we were marching, but it did stay peaceful. There was no one hurt, to the best of my knowledge. The actual speeches up on City Hall were great. There were over 2,000 people there. As you can see in the video, you can't see the end of the crowd in any direction. We're going to keep talking about this until it changes. George Floyd was not the first, and he is not even the last. We've had more already since him. We need to fix this. I wanted to talk to you guys about the Ending Qualified Immunity Act, but unfortunately, Justin Amash held out a little too long to get an actual written bill out there, and it just came out yesterday. So next week we will dive into the Ending Qualified Immunity Act because that is what we need to do right now. This is important, guys. This is one of the big, huge reasons that cops get away with murdering people and brutalizing people on a daily basis. So we need to pass this bill. It already has a bunch of co-sponsors, and it was written by Justin Amash and Representative Presley, Ariana Presley. So yeah, check that out, and next week we will be diving into that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy Monday again, and check us out on Wednesday night. I'll have Tony D'Orazio on the live show, so check that out. But until then, keep up the fight. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Fight for Liberty, and please donate to the channel, patreon.com/fightforliberty.